Hello and welcome to this second recorded walkthrough of the United Kingdom Terminology Centre's Data Migration and Analytics Workbench. This is a proof of principle application written in Microsoft Access, demonstrating some of the properties and the possible advanced uses of the data migration mapping products and the terminologies and classifications that they link. The application is divided into four main areas of functionality: the largely text-based console, which is displaying now, and three graphical tools, the Browse, Queries, and EPR Data Analytics modules that can be started using the buttons at the bottom left. This walkthrough provides an overview of the first graphical tool, the Browse tool, which is displaying now. Most users of this workbench application as a whole may only very rarely need to use the Browse tool. For any individual code in one of the three terminology systems, the Browse tool allows direct lookup of the authoritative UKTC map to some other terminology or classification within the system. Such lookup on a code basis may be sufficient when only very small numbers of codes need mapping. The Query tool or the Excel add-ins would be more useful when larger numbers of codes need mapping. The lookup may also help investigate whether the unexpected behavior of any application that depends on the maps might be due to a mapping error. The Browse tool divides into two fundamental sections of the interface. Across the top is the Browse focus and its associated maps. The Browse focus concept and Browse focus terminology are the terminology and concept displaying at top left. In the current display, the Browse focus terminology is 5-byte read version 2, given the shortcode RCT, and within that Browse focus terminology, the Browse focus concept is the root node, 5 dots one after the other. Also displaying in the Browse focus strip across the top are the concepts in other classifications or terminologies that have a mapping relationship to the Browse focus concept, so in CTV3 and in SNOMED. And the triple or triad of concepts displaying across the top are always related to one another by means of mapping tables. The other part of the display are the three hierarchy views, which at the moment are a bit small to read. So I'll make them a bit bigger using the increase and decrease font size buttons that have been seen previously in other walkthroughs. Other screen layout button controls are available to the right of the font resizers. This button toggles the visibility of the Access ribbon and navigation panes, at least in Access 2007 and above. The magnifying glasses beside can assist you in resizing the application window to fit on unusually sized screen displays by making it correspondingly smaller or larger. This is usually, however, an unnecessary step because the application typically makes a reasonably good guess at resizing itself to whatever display panel resolution it finds itself on. You can force it to attempt that automatic resize by clicking anywhere on the background. The three white hierarchy panes are loosely coupled both to one another and to the Browse focus strip across the top. The left-hand hierarchy will always display a hierarchy taken from the terminology shown on the left-hand side of the Browse focus strip. And at the moment it is also showing the same concept, but it's not always the case that the concept will be the same, although the terminology will always match the one in the left-hand side of the Browse focus strip. Similarly, the center hierarchy always displays concepts from the terminology shown in the center of the Browse focus strip, but not necessarily always focused on the concept showing in the Browse focus strip. The loose coupling can be demonstrated if I click on one of the items in the hierarchy showing on the left. If I click on B ... neoplasms in the left-hand side with the left mouse button, As long as I hold the mouse button down, that item becomes bold and in purple, and at the same time the other two hierarchies alter themselves to show the concept in clinical terms version 3, to which the read concept I've clicked on is mapped, and also the SNOMED concept to which it is mapped. Similarly, if I click on digestive system diseases, we'll see the two hierarchies again momentarily change. And as long as I hold the mouse button down, I can see the map concepts in CTV3 and SNOMED. So we can see how the mapping relationship for an individual code can be seen in the other terminologies, as long as the code that we wish to inspect is displayed in the hierarchy at the left. Clearly, in order to inspect the mapping relationships for any code in the browse focus terminology, it's necessary to find that code first and have it displayed in the hierarchy at left. And the browse tool provides 4 different ways to find individual codes. The first method I'm going to demonstrate is probably the least useful, but the tools that allow it to happen have other uses that will be demonstrated later. As well as having a browse-focused terminology, in the current configuration that's 5-byte read, there is also a browse-focused mapping table that sits behind the tool. At the moment, the mapping table is the read code to CTV3 map, and this is displayed in the drop-down dialog at the bottom, and also evidenced across the top by the fact that the read codes appear in the left-hand column and CTV3 in the center. But because there is a mapping table behind the tool, it's possible to step through that table one row at a time, using the record navigators at the bottom right of the application. By this method, we can step through the read code table alphabetically, and as we do, the CTV3 mapping relationship changes, both in the browse focus strip across the top and the hierarchies aligning themselves as we go. We can also see, as we step through the table, that the color of the background changes from green to red and back again. The significance of the color is that it determines or indicates whether or not the mapping relationship between the left-hand browse focus terminology and the center terminology is assured or not. Is the map in this particular display from 5-byte read to CTV3 assured or not? When the background is green, that indicates that the mapping is assured. So the mapping from 0113 dot to 0113 dot in clinical terms version 3 is an assured map. If by contrast the background changes to red, that indicates that the mapping is not assured. Clearly, stepping through the mapping table one code at a time is a very inefficient way to find a particular code. So a more useful technique is to navigate up and down the hierarchies, and this can be done by double-clicking on items in the hierarchy. So for example, taking the read hierarchy on the left, if instead of holding the mouse button down on occupations to bring up the mappings, I double-click on it, the left-hand hierarchy will refocus itself on that concept, displaying the ancestor codes, if any, and also the immediate children. And I can move up and down the hierarchy in this way until I find a particular code that I'm interested in examining the mappings for. However, it can be seen that whilst I'm doing this, the right-hand panes remain focused on the concepts that they were previously on, unless and until, again, I hold the mouse button down. So, having reached the E31 ... sub-hierarchy of read codes, I may be interested in the mapping for E310 . So if I hold the mouse button down on that concept, I can momentarily see the corresponding mapped concepts in CTV3 and in SNOMED. In the same way that I can navigate around the left-hand hierarchy by clicking on concepts, double-clicking on concepts, you can do it in either of the other two. So I can equally navigate around the clinical terms version 3 hierarchy, or even around the SNOMED hierarchy. and the interfaces or the three panes behave the same way, that as long as I hold the left mouse button down, the other two panes will realign themselves to show the mapped relationships, the equivalent concepts in the other terminologies for the one I'm currently selecting and highlighting. This method of navigating around to find concepts is, however, dependent on a lot of mouse clicking and also knowing exactly where within the individual hierarchy the concept you want to look at is located. Another limitation of using the hierarchy-driven approach to inspect mappings is that when you click on a concept to inspect its mapping, you only ever see the concept code to which the highlighted concept maps. Under certain circumstances, it may be important to see the description code as well, and this is only visible in the Browse Focus pane across the top. So one of the functions that may be required from time to time is to select a concept in one of the hierarchies and force it to become the Browse Focus tool for the entire browse environment. To do this, instead of double-clicking on a concept, hold the Control key down whilst double-clicking. So if, for example, I wish to make the read code 01 top managers into the Browse Focus for the entire tool, I hold the Control key down and double-click on it. And now we can see that all three hierarchies are persistently displaying the mapped concepts for the top managers concept, and this is because the Browse Focus pane has been updated to make the code that I double-clicked on the Browse Focus for the entire tool. To avoid all the mouse clicking and having to know where within the hierarchies a given code is, a third method of finding a code is also provided, and that's direct code searching. This is started by using the binocular icon at top left. So, for example, if I wish to go straight to the code H33 ... in 5-byte read, enter the code in that dialog, and the entire tool, including the Browse Focus strip across the top, will refocus itself on the code that you've selected. You don't have to specify a code from the far left-hand terminology to do this. So, for example, if instead of typing in a read code, I enter a CTB3 code, so let's take the code for late onset asthma, X101 lowercase u. By default, the initial search on any code that's entered is conducted over the Browse Focus terminology, the one at the extreme left. But the code I've just entered isn't in the read codes, and the application has already worked out that it's found in Clinical Terms version 3, the terminology previously in the center. In order to make this concept the Browse Focus, it's therefore necessary to change the underlying Browse Focus map from the map, previously the RCT CTV3 map, to, in this case, the CTV3 RCT as the most likely candidate. And so the Browse Focus strip across the top has been reordered, the terminologies within it have been reordered, and now we've got hierarchies for CTV3 on the far left, read in the center, and SNOMED still on the right-hand side. I can make SNOMED the Browse Focus terminology by selecting a SNOMED code, so I'll type in 414270001, disorder of bronchus, from SNOMED. And again, it will conclude this is not a CTV3 code, even though that was the Browse Focus. It's already changed it to SNOMED as the Browse Focus with CTV3 in the center pane, and as soon as I click OK, it will retrieve the hierarchies for the concept that I have put in. So under certain circumstances, in response to the codes that you enter, the application will make its own decision as to what the Browse Focus mapping table should be. But it's also possible to force it to make a particular choice from the drop-down dialog at the bottom left. So I've just reverted back to the terminology Browse Focus map that we started with. The problem with the direct code lookup approach is that the code or Browse Focus that is returned will always be the preferred term for the concept that you have selected. The importance of this can be demonstrated if we search for a particular code, H330.extrinsic atopic asthma. Although it's found the code that I want and is now displaying the mapping relationships for it, what's not obvious from the current display is that there are other synonyms of H330. That may have different mapping relationships. So, for example, the 1-2 term code variant of H330 actually comes out with the term childhood asthma, and the mappings in Clinical Terms version 3 and SNOMED for that underlying concept are very different from the map for the preferred term, extrinsic atopic asthma. So under certain circumstances it may be important to examine the maps for individual synonyms of a particular concept, and these are only accessible using the record navigators that were demonstrated earlier. The final method for finding codes within the Browse tool is to search lexically on the terms associated with the codes. Two different methods of doing this are provided within the tool. The first of which will be very familiar and is enabled by deselecting all the buttons in this cluster of options, search options in the top right of the interface. With all of those options deselected, if I type in a text string, so for example I wish to search the browse focused terminology, the left-hand terminology in the display, for all descriptions or all codes with descriptions that contain the tokens leg and pain, I will get two answers from the read codes. The search is token order independent. If I search for pain leg instead of leg pain, I'll get the same answers. But there is another way to search the read codes lexically, and that is to not search the read codes directly at all, but in fact to conduct the lexical part of the search within SNOMED, on the grounds that SNOMED has many more concepts and many more descriptions. Having found a set of SNOMED concepts that match the search expression, it's then possible to use the mapping tables to generate a list of read code concepts that are equivalent to the SNOMED concepts that matched the lexical expression. And this can all be done transparently in the background. To show this in action, I'll begin by reselecting some of the buttons in the search strategy cluster at top right. The least aggressive strategy for searching SNOMED will return all the SNOMED concepts that contain leg and pain in one or other of the descriptions, not necessarily both in the same description. When we do this and then retrieve the set of read codes that map to that, we find that there were 16 SNOMED concepts that were found using the search criteria I described, but only 3 read code concepts mapped to those 16 concepts. Maybe some of those 16 had no read codes mapping to them at all. And the 3 read codes returned were the 2 that we got searching read codes directly, plus a new one, 1M1 ... pain in lower limb. We can be more aggressive in our strategy of searching SNOMED for these tokens, and the more buttons we light up across the strategy line of the search configuration, the more aggressive the strategy gets. Now we have 4 results coming back in the read codes. If I crank the handle up a little higher to what is, in my experience, the sweet spot in this strategy, we'll find rather more. Now we've got 45 SNOMED concepts, and there are 18 different 5-byte read concepts that map to them. We can see from the list that we're getting pains in the leg and pains in part of the leg. We're also getting concepts in read that don't mention pain or leg as a word. Claudication is pain in the legs as a result of ischemia. We're getting joint pain, arthralgia, pains in parts of legs. So these are concepts which are more inspired semantically by the tokens than a direct lexical match. And if we crank the strategy to the most aggressive form, this effect is even more pronounced. So now we have 196 different SNOMED concepts identified by the most aggressive searching strategy, although ultimately the number of read concepts, 31 that were returned, is not very different from slightly less aggressive searching of SNOMED. The details of the algorithm used to invoke this variable strategy are outside the scope of this walkthrough, but are documented in other presentations available through the IHTSDO. A further option, configurable via the search panel cluster at top right, is whether or not to use the word equivalences. The value of this can be demonstrated by searching read through SNOMED for occurrence of tranquilizer with a single L and an S. There are not that many SNOMED concepts that have tranquilizer spelt in that way appearing in any of their descriptions. Only 16 were found, and as a result only 5 read code concepts. More common within the read codes and in SNOMED are spellings with 2 L's and or a Z. If we invoke the word equivalence table, which is aware of these possible alternate spellings, but run the same search, then a rather larger number of SNOMED concepts is returned, and correspondingly a rather larger number of 5-byte read codes. Although again we can see from this list that the codes returned are more inspired by tranquilizer than containing that particular term. Having produced a set of interesting concepts by string searching, it's then possible to examine each individual one within its native hierarchy to see where it sits by clicking on it in the list displayed in the center pane. This allows you to verify by means of the hierarchy that the code that you wish to select really is the one whose mappings you wish to inspect. Having found one that you're interested in, so let's say this SL946 code at the bottom, the question then is how to make that the browse focus of the entire tool. This is relatively simple. The mere act of clicking on a code within the result list in the center, and indeed also in fact on any of the hierarchies, also copies that code into the Windows clipboard. And this means that if you open up the search button and simply paste direct from the Windows clipboard, the last code that you clicked on will automatically be pasted in. You can run the search on that and refocus the entire tool on that concept, including the browse focus strip across the top. It can be seen in the current view, however, that the central pane, where the CTB3 hierarchy in this instance would normally be displayed, has been co-opted in order to display the search results. And this leads us to one of the buttons at the bottom left, the Show and Hide Synonyms button. One of its functions is to take away the results screen and redisplay the CTB3 hierarchy underneath. However, if a search results screen is not already displayed, and you click the Show Synonyms button, then a different pane is co-opted to display slightly different information. Every time you click on a concept, whether it's in this case a 5-byte read CTB3 or SNOMED concept, then other information not visible elsewhere in the interface is pasted into a cumulative transcript. So for SNOMED concepts you get to see all of their synonyms and whether they're preferred or fully specified terms or synonyms, and also a certain amount of the semantic information within SNOMED, which may be more visible in this slightly cramped view by making the font size smaller. So we have the historical relationships and some of the defining relationships for the underlying concept. This view can be made to disappear again by toggling the switch at the bottom left. The cluster of options here, the Apply button, the Code Starts, Active and Assured buttons, are non-functional at the moment and generally not used. Another feature of the interface is these little bidirectional white arrows. These indicate whether or not the mapping from a concept on the left, so this arrow down here, is telling me that if I map forwards from the focus concept to CTV3 and then backwards back into read, I end up at the same concept I started from. When the arrow points in only one direction, that indicates that if you mapped backwards, you might end up at a different code from the one that you started from. The last component of the Browse tool that I want to cover is the Report Map Error button at the bottom right of the tool. Whilst wandering around the mapping tables using the Browse tool, it's possible you may come across mapping assertions that you don't agree with or that are frankly wrong. For example, if you return back to the home screen, make the font a little smaller so we can see more clearly, and examine the map for perinatal conditions down here, you'll notice that sometimes the mouse doesn't always get the right concept. That's sometimes improved by selecting a different font size. Well, now we've managed to select the Q ... perinatal condition code in the read codes. Perhaps if we make it the browse focus, the issue will become a little clearer. In both 5-byte read and also in SNOMED, the concept perinatal disorder or perinatal condition has quite a few descendants, whereas the mapped concept in Clinical Terms version 3 does not, and there is a very likely candidate parent perinatal disorder, which seems to be possibly a more appropriate map from the read code. So based on what we've seen, it may be that the mapping between the read code Q ... and the QZ ... concept in CTV3 may not be ideal. It may be more appropriate to map to this XE2R6 concept. When such a mapping error is identified, the first step is to make the map show up in the Browse Focus pane across the top, as I have done now. And once you've got those three up there showing as being definitely related to a mapping relationship that you don't agree with, the final step is to click on the Report Map Error button. An initial confirmation dialog will pop up showing you exactly which mapping statements you're reporting you don't agree with. And if you click the OK button, an automatically formatted email will be sent to the Information Standards Help Desk. You don't have to give an explanation of why you disagree with the map. Simply send an email with the map statement in it. If it's not clear to the recipient what the nature of the disagreement is, they may contact you directly on the email address supplied. If you decide that you don't wish to send the email, you can simply cancel it. And that concludes this walkthrough of the Browse tool of the Data Migration and Analytics Workbench. Thanks for watching and listening.